If you know my music, and if you've ever actually heard me talk about music in general, I subscribe to this philosophy that there are essentially two really important factors in music composition. And these are my two pillars, okay? The first is having a great main idea, like a theme, right? A melody. In my case, it mostly takes the form of a melody, but it could be anything. A little riff, I mean, a rhythmic idea. It could be a little motif. You know, it could be anything, right? Having a great core idea, in my mind, is 90% of the creative process right there. Because once you have a really, really great idea, you can do anything with it. You can do anything with it. You can reharmonize it. You can rearrange it. You can fly it into other movements in a multi-work piece. I mean, there's so much benefit to having a really, really, really solid main idea. If you have a solid main idea, people look forward to that main idea coming back, right? There is a school of thought that goes, the main idea isn't as important as the way you develop it. And I know a lot of really, really great legendary composers who subscribe to that school of thought. It's just not the way I like to approach things. And I just think that, you know, it's so worth it getting that main idea correct, right? I feel like I've done it maybe 2 or 3 times in my lifetime. I mean, you know, my civilization themes, I feel like I nailed those main ideas pretty well. A couple other pieces, yeah, but really, I think finding the main core idea is just so worth the investment of time, right? Now, that's pillar number 1 of my creative process. Pillar number 2 is form. Your pieces should never be predictable to the point that the audience knows exactly what's about to happen before it even happens. Because what you want to constantly do is you want to engage your audience, right? You want to suck people in from the very, very first note and never let go of their attention, because there are so many ways to lose people's attention, especially if your music is heard on the internet or on a streaming service or anything other than a concert hall where you're sort of stuck in your seat. You are actually competing in a high stakes attention circuit against video games and TV and the internet and news. Just everything in the world is going to try to get people to disengage with your music. And so if you want your music to succeed long run, you really want to lock people in and kind of keep them invested in your pieces, right? And the way you do that is just by carefully presenting new ideas and reshaping old ideas and just sort of like introducing little elements of surprise throughout a piece, such that the audience never says, oh, I'm smarter than this piece already. I already know what's going to happen. Why do I need to listen to the rest of it? I already know what's going to happen. And then they disengage. And by the way, once somebody makes up their mind that they don't want to hear that piece of yours, there's a good chance they won't ever actually want to hear any other pieces of yours, right? That's kind of how it is. That's how the internet, it's like the way the internet works, right? The moment you sort of like clicked a downvote on something, you don't see content of that type, you know, resurface in your feed, right? So that's kind of the world that we're in right now, and the, you know, the stakes that we have and that we have to sort of compete with, right? So hopefully over the course of this, I'll share with you some strategies on how to keep things fresh and keep the audience engaged. So with that said, here we go. Back to Jeffrey's piece. Here we go. Who has seen the wind? Let's hear it. right, bravo, 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 Jeffrey. Okay, well done. Oops, hold on. Okay, good job, good job, good job. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna transfer this over to my iPad, and then we're gonna take a closer look at this score. Here we go. All right, you all seeing this, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Seeing the way. Great. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Notes here. So first of all, let me tell you that actually Christina Rossetti is one of my favorite poets. I've actually set Goblin Market to music before. Generally speaking, I love lyric poetry as sources of text. And I'm not the only one. I mean, you know, if you know, for example, Eric Whitaker's works, Ola Yelo's works, you know, they work with a contemporary lyric poet named Charles Anthony Silvestri, right? And lyric poetry, I mean, you know, the name implies it, right? It just works so well as lyrics because it tends to be metrical. The sentiments are parsable in short phrases, right? It doesn't rely on a lot of like heavy word games. You know, it doesn't have a lot of sort of artificial constructs of sentence structure where, you know, phrases are, you know, the sections are moved around just to make things poetic. It is very approachable as lyrics. And if you ever read Stephen Sondheim, you know, he talks about how, you know, in his mind, and he's one of the great lyricists of musical theater, in his mind, lyrics should give space for the music to do the thing, right? Lyrics should not be so overpowering and so demanding of attention that the music can't itself express the actual emotion that the lyric is trying to convey, right? When we set pieces of poetry to music, you know, what we're doing is we're creating an enhanced version of the emotion contained within that poetry, right? Music has this ability to supplement emotion. That's why film scoring exists, right? But you don't want your music and your lyrics to constantly be vying for attention with one another, right? And my opinion, and a lot of opinions of choral composers and musical theater composers out there, is the music is paramount for this delivery of the emotion, right? Now, where I probably differ from a lot of other composers is that I still think that music should be the main leading factor and that lyrics should be subservient to the music. That's a charged word, but you know, I think that's how I picture it in my mind. It's all about the music, and hopefully that's why you're all here, because it's about the music. So let's look at this. I just have some specific things that I think will, you know, will maybe open your eyes to some possibilities, ways to, you know, sort of like enhance this piece a little bit. Now, like I said, generally speaking, I love the main theme of it. I like the do, 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 do. It's very lyrical. It's lovely. It's a lovely melody. I don't say that a lot. I think it's a really great melody. I think the fact that you repeat it a lot actually helps us learn to love your melody. I think that's actually a trick that one can employ in composing your pieces. Like if you've got a 3-minute piece and each musical idea is only heard once, nobody's going to remember any of those musical ideas, right? But if you take a musical idea and repeat it a couple of times, it becomes ingrained in your mind by the end of the piece. And the way that music works for the average listener is the more you're familiar with a piece of music, the more you actually like it, right? I mean, music is one of those rare art forms where that's the case. Like, you can watch a movie maybe once, or you can watch a sporting match once, right? Because after that, you know what happens and you're not going to get any pleasure out of it. You can watch a movie a couple of times, right? Most of the time you watch a movie once. Same with TV shows. Video games, you know, you play through them and you spend, you know, 50, 60 hours playing them, but not often do you reboot them unless they're Civilization, right? Let's be honest here. And you know, that's one of the beautiful things about music. The more somebody knows your piece of music, the more they like it. And the more, if you've done it right, you know, the more they look forward to hearing things come back, right? So what you've done here is actually kind of a clever thing. You've built in enough repetition so that people learn your melody by the time they're done with the piece and they learn to love it, right? But the tricky thing here is how do you do that while keeping it fresh every time and not making the listener think, okay, I know what's going to happen, right? And this is where I think your piece falls a little bit into that trap, just a little bit. Now, we hear the melody a lot. We like it a lot. We look forward to hearing it again, but frankly, every time it sort of comes back, we know how it's going to end, especially after the first couple iterations of it, right? So that said, I think you've nailed pillar number one. Let's talk about pillar number two just a little bit here. I love this little intro that you have. You know, again, these 4 phrases here, I mean, they're all sort of the same idea, right? And the same idea keeps coming back over and over again. And I love this piece as an instrumental break here, these sections here. But when they come back later on in the piece, we know kind of what's going to happen even before it comes up. But the beauty of a passage like this is it can be anything, right? You know, whatever, right? The next time it comes back, that running line can run anywhere and it can stay familiar because you can keep the rhythm. You know, this is a very good device. That rhythm, right? The right hand, that pattern, it's a great device. It's a very signature device. You have plenty of things to anchor familiarity in this piece, which gives you a lot of room to do wild and crazy things. And you do that at the end. You know, I actually think the end is a perfect time to introduce a new idea. It keeps people sort of wanting to hear a little more after the piece is over, right? I think your piece in general could use a little more of that. Now, there are a couple of technical things here. This pattern here, right? Everyone see this? It's great. At certain tempos, it will be hard to play that rhythm piano because a keyboard, depending on what the middle school piano, you know, how well it's maintained and stuff like that, it may have a hard time catching fast repeated notes, right? Just due to the mechanics of the piano. I think you can get away with it at this tempo, but tempos tend to fluctuate in live performance, right? Something I would ask you too, because I think a pianist might ask you this, do you want any pedal on this piece? Like, do you want, for example, where's my pedal? Here it is. Like refreshing the pedal on every bar. You know, that's something that you might want to address because they'll probably ask you this, right? Looking at this next page here, this page, I would notate these like this because it conveys the sense of pulse a little better, right? Right now, this actually kind of looks like 24/16 rather than 12/8 just because of the way it's broke up.
Right.
You know, these are just sort of like little things, clerical things, not hugely important to know. Okay. Let's talk about the range here. These are your baritones, right? In middle school lingo, that just basically means all your men, right? Because none of them are high enough to be tenors, and most of the basses aren't fully developed yet. They can't sing all that low. You're stretching the top of their range just a little bit there, right? When I listened to this entire piece, I thought you could actually change the key of this piece. Could drop it down like to G minor or something like that, a whole step down, and still maintain a lot of the, you know, the effect of it all. But you wouldn't have like those middle school altos and baritones reaching for those high notes, which you hear just a little bit. And this actually goes to a point that somebody else had brought up. Somebody had asked me, I get so familiar writing in just a handful of key signatures. How do I break out of that? I think either, you know, you just get comfortable feeling your way around the keyboard in other keys, which is, you know, probably the best way to do it. But the other way is you just write a piece in the key that you feel familiar with and then transpose it later on. There's really no disadvantage to doing that. I mean, I would look at a piece like this and I would say, okay, yeah, maybe it could go down to like, you know, or even just a half step down. That, you know, sometimes half step is all you really need. And I don't see a lot of people sort of like, well, I mean, I guess it does get a little low for the women, but the men are kind of in their upper register the whole time. So, you know, I think you can afford to go down a little bit here. Something I would say is I felt like your singers naturally wanted to hold this like this.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I could sort of sense that. I think it's sort of customary to default when you've got something like this. I mean, this is essentially an 8-bar melody. You know, it's meant to be thought of as one unit. When you have something like this, you can sort of default to having your breaths be a beat long, right? If it's 2 beats long like this, you might have some people breathe, and you know, like breathe across those 2 beats. Some people kind of like linger on 1 beat and then take a, you know, a snatch breath like during the last beat, you know, beat 4. What you really want to do is actually make it unambiguous so that everyone breathes together, right? But not only that, you want to make it unambiguous so everyone hits their final consonants together. So looking at the next line, this line here. Who has seen the wind? Right? This tie here, this tie creates a little ambiguity for wind. Where does the D take place, right? If I were doing this, I probably would have just done this because then it's a who has seen the wind. The D just goes on the rest, you know? You know, you could also notate it like, this, for example, if you really wanted, right? Actually, I wouldn't put quarter rest there. I'd put 2/8 rest, right? But you know, things like that will sort of clean up the release of these notes, and that's kind of a thing with choral music. You know, like especially English. There's a lot of consonants on the ends of words, and if those consonants don't line up, especially letters like T, for example, you get this thing that happens, which you don't really want. Okay, so what else? Let's look at the next thing. Okay. What page am I on here? When the trees would die, the wind. Okay, right. So some range issues here. Now, you know, the other reason why I think you would want to give a longer breath in a place like this, like you would want to give more of a, you know, like a dotted whole note breath here. With this notes like this, so that all of your singers get a full beat of breath before they have to sing this phrase here, right? It helps sustain them with plenty of support, especially when they get to this note, you know, the high note, right? I think this becomes more of an issue later on in the piece when everyone's singing forte. But that's the other thing, you know, you just want to prep them for what comes next. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so over in this section here, you add another voice. Great, love it. What I love is that choosing a vowel like oo, I mean, it's a very standard thing to, you know, have singers on, but in this case, due to the brilliance of Christina Rossetti and the English language, it really meshes well with a lyric that goes, who has seen the wind? Neither I nor you. It just works out well, right? So, you know, great. What I would caution against though, is when you have lines and counter lines, you know, here's your main melody and here is your counter line, right? I think you really want to carve space so that the full movement of the main melody, these notes here, right, don't actually run into the motion of these notes here, because what the motion of these notes will do is sort of obscure the motion of your main melody, right? So what's a good way to describe this? Let's say, you know, let's say here's your main melody, like that, right? And then let's say the counter line, I'll just put it like this. Your counter line is basically like this, you know? So when you have the note, okay, when you have, let me erase this here. When your melody goes from A to C natural here, if you've already got something holding down the C natural there, you're in a way sort of like removing the freshness of the melody going up to that C natural, if you know what I mean. Like you, it's sort of like you steal away from the thunder of that. And so what I'm a huge proponent of, and many people might disagree with me, but keeping plenty of space between all of your moving lines such that you never get into this situation where the main line actually collides with something that's already inhabited. Principles of vocal arranging that I live around, right? And that is that you want to always leave space for your main idea to kind of claim the attention and not have to sort of compete with other voices for that attention. In this case here, you've gotten over the issue because this is marked piano and this is marked mezzo forte, right? So balance-wise, you've addressed that, so that's great. Also, range-wise, your baritones are going to be at the top of their register, so they're obviously going to project more, as well as, prepubescent young men will be able to do. Your altos are at the bottom of their range, and generally speaking, that means that, generally speaking, like the instruments that are in the tessitura, like their most resonant part of their voice, i.e. your baritones here, are generally going to pop out over those that are kind of like in the weaker parts of their voices, right? So that is something that I think people, especially if you're not fully familiar with the instruments of the orchestra and voice types, that's one of the important things to learn, I think. It's not just enough to know what are the ranges of instruments. What you really need to know is where the instruments sound best, where they project most, and where they're weakest, because that's really how you make a lot of orchestration decisions. Like, what's happening here? Who's in their tessitura and making, the most strident, most powerful sound? And where's everyone else? Are they competing against that, right? This is just sort of a bedrock of arranging, if you ask me. So, one thing that I thought you might want to do with a passage like this is you didn't necessarily have to have the voices, all the voices coming right in, right here. This could have actually, you could have gotten rid of this note and actually had them come in on the E natural, right? I think that could have been a very sort of natural way for them to start. Let's see. Your oohs, in general, I think you might also want to consider adding breaths in them as well, too. It gives them a chance to refresh and refocus. Breaths are also important for attacks, right? Like if everyone's breathing together at the same time, there's a much higher chance that they're going to come in together at the same time. And if you have a word like to, for example, you really want to make sure nobody's trying to snatch your breath too late and they come in late with the consonant t, right? And then that just kind of spoils it. I'm going to do the thing that everyone hates and point out the parallel fifths here, right?
Yeah.
Why do we do parallel fifths? Why don't we do parallel fifths? Okay, so here's the thing. There are plenty of parallel octaves, fifths, fourths everywhere you look, right? The only reason that we avoid them is to help us give independence to the voices, right? We want voices to have motion of their own and to be appreciated when you sort of dive into the details and look past that lead voice. You want to be able to look at the counterpoint and say, wow, that's actually a really great line in and of itself, right? One of the people, somebody asked me, about multi-movement works and tying them all together with motifs and things like that. I'll be honest with you, when I write a piece like Calling All Dawns, for example, or To Shiver the Sky, a lot of times what happens is I write a piece and then I write some counterpoint to the main idea of that piece. But because I like writing counterpoint so much and I'm really invested in doing, you know, what I think is great counterpoint, a lot of times that counterpoint leads, that becomes a new piece in a way, right? You can, with some of my pieces, you can extract a little riff that happens somewhere, and that riff turns into a full other piece in the entire album or multi-movement work or whatever you want to call it. I'm a big believer in counterpoint. I think it's what gives richness to pieces, and I think it's what, you know, in a way, like it gives a piece like that repeat listenability, right? Having more and more details for people to explore on the second and third listens. And like we talked about at the beginning of this, the more people hear your piece, you know, the more they like it, right? So any sort of thing that you can give them that makes them say, oh, wait, I want to go back and I want to listen to that after this is over, the better. So with that in mind, I think what you could have done is made the movement of the altos a little more detached from what the men are doing at this point, right? If you went like, something like that, right? Like have the altos move when the men are holding notes, that gives you a little more independence of voices, right? Which is, I think, kind of an important thing. Okay, what else? Let's see here. Okay. I would watch out for large gaps like these in your voices. Okay, so that's, there's a 12th there. No, an 11th actually. And, you know, not that there are hard and fast rules about things, but, you know, if you want kind of a cohesive choral sound, it's good to sort of keep things within an octave of each other, sort of, right? It just helps to sort of bind things together. And if you don't, I mean, there's kind of a gap right here, right in the middle of your, you know, in the middle of the sonic spectrum, really, where there's nothing going on. I think a fair amount of arranging is also the idea of like being aware of your entire sort of frequency spectrum, and then, you know, knowing where there are gaps, knowing what to fill them with or intentionally leave empty, and knowing how to keep it varied enough so that you're not, you know, swallowing up the entire spectrum of you know, frequencies, right? Maybe keeping things up high for a little while, then going down low, you know, then spreading out. Those are the sort of the ways that we shape a piece to give it like dynamic range and stuff like that. By the way, Jeffrey, I'm going to stop right here and say, I'm mentioning, I picked this piece because it had a lot of things that I could talk about that were in a lot of the other pieces. It's the piece that with the melody that I just got stuck in my head. So I don't mean to pile on and just turn this all into, you know, pointing out what I think could be improved on your piece. But generally speaking, I just like this piece. And so I thought I'd spend a good deal of time talking about the things that apply to a lot of people's music, honestly, but just on your piece here. So here we go, this section here. Now we're back into perfect time to mix it up. Do something different, anything, you know? You know, even bars like this. You can, I mean, this is it's a vamping bar, right? Perfect time to just. And now you're in a new key, right? Right? Something that I love to do a lot of is to modulate. I like to take familiar material and then put it in a new key. And half the fun is those little modulation devices that kind of like get you to that new key, right? It's one of these things where it's like a shift into a new gear in a car, right? It just kicks your piece up to another level. And if you're smart about it, you can do it a lot. If you listen to classic musical theater songwriters, they're constantly modulating. Listen to Alan Menken, for example. He's a hero of mine. I love him. He's constantly moving around key centers, and that has the advantage of actually being able to present a familiar theme, but in a fresh, new way, so that even though the audience is hearing it again, they don't feel like they're hearing the exact same thing again. But the other really useful thing about switching keys a lot is that it allows different instruments or voice types to sing in their tessituras or play in their tessituras, because, you know, one key is not going to be the right key for your melody for every single instrument or voice part, right? So if, for example, you went to a different key here, you might give the altos a really great range to take the lead melody, right? I think modulation is a great device. It's used not as much as I would like it. It's never used in pop music these days. It's never used in film scores these days. It's kind of a sad sort of lost art. Even jazz, you know, everything tends to be sort of static in one key. But really, if you listen to great long symphonic works, there's a lot of, you know, modulation and tonicization happening. You know, there's a lot of harmonic growth, right? And the real beauty of it is if you can write like a 46, 52, 57-minute long work, and across the whole work, you go through all the keys and you find yourself back in the home key at the very end. I mean, you know, I love that. I do it for all my albums. It's so important for me to do that. It's so important to sort of like go somewhere really far removed from your home and then in a very sort of heroic fashion, bring it all back later on, right? I think that's really important. Okay, so the modulations are good. Okay. I think generally speaking, I think it's all, I've covered a lot of it. I like the very end, how you change things up here, right? You add new harmonies, new dissonances. You know, I love them. I think that what might have been nice is in this bar here, instead of, you know, when you do that, first of all, you actually have an overlap in your fingers, right? This F is actually below this A. So it creates a little bit of a, you know, a tangled thing for the pianist. Not a huge deal. But, you know, what I thought would have been great is here, what you're doing is you're driving momentum all the way to your big final cadence here, right? I mean, this is the perfect time for your left hand just to be playing an E, right? Because then you get, right? You know, just building that harmonic tension to a big satisfactory cadence at the end. Something like that really would have been nice, and just a sort of way to break out of the A minorness of the whole thing, right? So on the whole, like I said, you know, I love the melody. I love what you did with the mode mixture. I think it's all great. You know, I just think that people should look structurally more at their pieces and try to find ways to add structural interest to something, because that's what sort of maintains pieces for longer and longer durations. And all we're talking about 3-minute pieces in today's class, right? That's not a huge amount of space to fill up. But once you start getting commissions for 12-minute pieces or, you know, multi-movement works or things like that, then you really need the entire bag of tricks at your disposal in order to keep audience interest going the whole time. I'm not saying this to you specifically, but to everyone in general. Like, it's very easy to write a short piece and keep people captivated. Once you start saying, I'm going to write 12-minute pieces, whatever, then you have to start really looking into how do you keep people engaged. And the truth is you can't stay on one idea very long. You actually kind of have to move around between ideas, right? So this is something I would encourage everyone actually to do. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Bravo, bravo.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at the next piece. This is Fashions, Mores in Victoria. This is by Samba Zhou.
Hello, sir. Hey, guys.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Good.
All right, tell us about your piece.
Okay. I can't remember too much about it, but I think when I was year 11, a friend of mine who was a game developer, and he asked me to write a piece for a background music for a wedding scene in a game he was making. So I just wrote this miserable piece because I thought it's quite suitable. Yeah.
Okay.
That's about it.
That was probably the worst intro for a piece I've ever seen from a composer. You gotta be like, you have to present with a little more sort of like, excitement and enthusiasm, right? Especially in a safe context like this. We're not here to tear anyone apart. By the way, I deliberately made this a closed Zoom meeting rather than my initial intent of making it kind of like a web stream, because I wanted it to feel like a safe, comfortable environment for composers. And the other thing, and maybe some of you will relate to me here, but I also wanted to make this a safe, comfortable environment for people who want to be pop music songwriters or composers or arrangers, film score composers, people who aren't necessarily locked into this idea that you have to write modern music to be in a master's program in a conservatory, right? Like, I really feel like there's enough of that out there. When I went to school, it was a lot of like, oh, well, that's a melody. Why did you write that? We don't write melodies anymore, right? You can't apply to grad school with that. No one will take you seriously. And that was actually sadly the case. No one took me seriously because I was writing tunes. But I really think that there is a place out there for instruction for people who want to write great tonal music, with functional harmony, chord changes, cadences, things like that, and to improve their skills doing so, right? So that's why I wanted to do this, because I think there aren't a lot of people out there teaching this. I mean, there are definitely, composition instructors out there. A lot of my friends, jazz writers, for example, will do great sessions on writing tonal music. But I really think that the time for judgment is over in music. I just do not like the heavy sort of disapproving glances that you get from like the entrenched sort of academic establishment, right? It's just not, it's just not practical anymore. So anyway, that said, I thought your piece was actually really nice, but I have some technical things that I wanted to talk about to help, take it to the next level, right? First of all, what does the title mean? Let me ask you.
Okay. It's from a poem by Baron. I think it's Prometheus. Yes, and I thought that sentence is pretty nice, so I chose it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Fashions Mores. What does Fashions Mores mean? Does it mean making death?
Yes, making death a victory. Yeah.
Okay, super. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up the iPad here. One thing I would like to say, Samba, you did a really nice thing. You actually created a video, a score animated video, which is really handy. I'm not using it now, but it was really great to see. Something that I was kind of shocked about for all of y'all is I got a lot of submissions, which were MP3s where there was very little metadata filled out in the piece, right? I mean, sometimes, the name of the piece wasn't even in the file name. So let's assume for a second that everything you put out into the internet might get shared somewhere, might get posted somewhere. It might lead you to your next gig. But if somebody doesn't know how to contact you or to pay you for your piece if they want to license it, you know, you're missing out on some opportunities there, right? I think that, I know this is just a classroom setting and all that, but when you send out MP3s, fill out your metadata, put your name as the artist, the composer, put the copyright in there, put your email address or website in the comments. You know, you never know who might stumble across something and say, oh, I want to reach out to them and commission them to write something or hire them to score my next film. But if they don't know how to reach you, they're not gonna, you know, reach out to you, right? And this is kind of one of these basic sort of organizational, you know, hygiene things, right, that you should be doing. Okay, so I'm going to play the piece. Actually, I'm gonna start here. Here we go. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop you right there. Okay, bravo, Samba. Okay, super. So I want to talk about a few things. As long as we're on this page, let's talk about this here, right? There, okay, so I think when you do, okay, so this gesture here, great on its own. This gesture here, great on its own. Together, kind of competing gestures, right? Competing for, you know, grit, competing for sonic space just a little bit. in general, when you get to your lower registers, and I'm talking about, you know, basically what your cello's playing on the staff, you know, maybe from, let's say, you know, from the F below middle C down, that's when frequencies and mud can really sort of like obscure all of the detail in the upper frequency piece of music, right? What you kind of want to do in a way is not make too much chaos in the bottom, you know, like if you think of music as a frequency spectrum, and here's middle C, right? Down here, it pays to have things be a little sort of like tighter, right? A little more clean, you know. This is why we don't put intervals like thirds and fourths down low in our voicings, right? This is why we tend to stick with things like octaves and fifths, because if you have those clashes, you know, down low, then the overtones of all of those noise starts to, you know, create like chaos in the upper range, right? And so what you want to do sort of is to be mindful of that, right? You know, not create too much going on down there such that it obscures, you know, in the upper frequencies, I suppose. This section here, octaves in the violins, super. The octaves sort of went away here, and I don't know why, because octaves and strings are great. Like if you really want a big soaring part, you know, playing your melody in octaves in the violins it's the classic Hollywood thing to do, right? What I would suggest, because you know, the question you had asked me earlier in the, you know, when you submit your questions, you would ask me like, how does one sort of break free from writing in just a few comfortable key signatures, right? That was you. I think if you were to take this piece and actually change the key of it and actually move it up, your violins would soar so much more. I mean, this is a nice range for violins here, right? This is nice. Above the C, above middle C, right? That's a good range for them. It could get even sweeter if this note went up to like an E or something like that, right? That is a really gorgeous resonant note on a violin, right? And that would allow this note to be here, right? This E, if you're doing things in octaves still, right? And that's a great range for things. Now, the other reason I think you might have wanted to reconsider what key you put this piece in, I'm going to go back to the beginning here. When you have, let me find my notes here. Here, this is the open string on, this is the open bottom string of a violin, right? And so they can't actually do vibrato on that.
Oh, yeah.
Open string,
Yeah.
right? So if you move everything up, instead of being in C minor and suddenly you're in E minor, for example, suddenly all of this opens up quite a bit. Like some of the points that I made about sort of like the mud in your lower frequency actually kind of goes away because you've lifted everything up, right? Not to mention now, this open G can be played with vibrato if that's what you want, right? This note here, this is the open C bottom string of the viola. They can't play that with vibrato either, right? I mean, you're not asking them to, but they couldn't. But now that becomes a fingered note. So the player has a lot more control over it. But the other thing, the other problem with playing open strings like this is there's a huge sonic difference between playing a note on an open string versus a fingered string, right? A thing like, wish I had a violinist here with me. If you play a note on an open string, it has a brightness and a vibrancy to it, right? That is like, it just pops out, right? It just, it's a little uncontrollable in a way. And that's why string players actually don't like to, whenever possible, like play open strings. The tonal mismatch between a string that's held down with a flesh and blood finger versus an open string, it's quite dramatic. And so you won't necessarily be able to do things, like, oops, hold on, let me pull this back up. You won't necessarily be able to get this effect, where this grows in an organic sort of way to this note, because you're going from open, 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 fingered, right? And there's a big tonal mismatch there. The open strings are gonna be way louder than the fingered strings are. So that's another good reason why you might wanna actually consider moving things up. The other thing is, assuming that this is eventually going to be played with live players, they sort of need to know how to bow things, right? Right now, I'll use this bar as an example. For example, right now, this is this figure here. Okay, you might want to do okay, like this. Let me write it out for you. You might want to consider something actually like this. Bar line, and then that's your, like that, right? What this actually tells the players is the first three notes, you go dot, 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 right? And then the second notes, you go bob, bob, up bow, and then the big note, big down bow, right? When you're writing for strings, you have to be very aware of what the bowing arm is doing, because it really affects attacks, it affects dynamics, it affects tone quality, it affects everything, like cohesion, rhythm, everything is about what the bowing arm is doing, right? So right now, the way you have it, it's really kind of unclear as to how they should bow. Should they go down, up, down, up, down, up? Well, ending on that up is not going to give you the effect that you want, right? You want a heavy bump at the end, right? So you have to work it out so that however they're playing that passage, they end up boom, like this on the next bar, right? So that's why you have to sort of be clearer about what you're doing bowing wise. I mean, it's helpful, I think, to be able to find a string player to run things by, but if you don't have one handy, it's not rocket science figuring out what works, in a string part or what doesn't work. Okay. If you were to get rid of, the tie here, right? This would just be like down, up, down, up, down, up, or it'd just be like up, down, up, down, up, down. But neither of these are really good options because you sort of want the beginning of the phrase to start with a down bow, or maybe you don't. I mean, it's kind of up to you, right? So you have to sort of figure out, like, how do you want these notes to be taken? Like, if you want this effect where every note is very distinct, then you just remove this slur, right? And they'll just go down, up, down, up, down, up, or up, down, up, down, up, down. It's going to make a big change. It's going to have a significant effect on how your music is sort of like performed and appreciated, right? So that's just something to be sort of mindful of. You also sort of want to indicate, what is this dynamic? Is this going to be, what is this? Is this a mezzo forte? Is it, what is it? Is it, what am I doing? Whoops, 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 whoops. What am I doing here? Is it forte? What is it? I mean, it's good to sort of be clear where you're going with things, because at the end of the day, you're trying to eliminate questions, right? You don't want to be in a session where everyone's getting paid a couple $100 an hour and you've got 65 players out there and it's all coming out of your own budget, by the way. And you don't want someone to say, so how do you want this to be bowed? Like, you want to answer as many of these questions in advance as possible, because then they can actually get on to, like, making music and recording your music for you, right? And one of these questions is, how loud is this going to be? Is it that? 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 You know, what is this? Like, clearing up sort of, you know, the ambiguity is a great thing to do. So let's see here. I would probably have put this in treble clef right there. I don't think that needs to be bass clef. Generally, when you're writing for harp, you sort of want to tell the harpist how to tune their instrument. In a case like this, what you're asking them to do is to set their pedals to these notes, right? So that's, you know, what you would sort of see in a harp part. Or you could do a harp pedal diagram like this. This would be this. You know, you can look up in orchestration textbooks how to write for harp, but that's kind of an important thing. Phrases like this, that's not possible to take under one bow. So you sort of want to like break it up. Like maybe this is an upbeat, up bow, sorry. Da, 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 da. Something like that maybe, you know, rather than just one long slur over the whole thing. That, you know, generally speaking, slurs for string parts refer to bowing, right? For something like a passage like this for your flutes here, they need some breath. They need somewhere to breathe. And then maybe, you know, this could be just a half note, pause there. So then this is one phrase, and then they can sort of refresh here, right? It's a slow tempo, and flutes run out of breath quicker than other woodwind instruments. So, you know, just find ways to indicate to them where to breathe so that they don't surprise you, you know, with the breath somewhere that you don't actually want it to be, right? I think that, okay, look at this. So remember what I said before about, you know, your ideas not overlapping and competing for the same notes. So that's kind of what's happening here, right? Your seconds are already playing an E flat, and your seconds are here, and your firsts are going, right? So this, it sort of steals away from this motion, right? If you were to take your seconds and actually just have them hold on the C natural, you're still, you know, the same chord tone, it's still the same note as this, but you clear up a little room for this motion to take place, and not sort of like fight something else, right? Notation-wise, tricky rhythms. Okay, so in my experience, I've had a lot of trouble getting harpists to play tricky rhythmic passages. The opening, gosh, what is it? Oh, Dao Zhe Fan Ye. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I speak Cantonese, sorry, not Mandarin. The third movement on Calling All Dawns, the opening harp solo. I can't tell you how many live harpists have had trouble with that rhythm. And in my mind, it's not a terribly tricky rhythm. But what you find classical players doing a lot of is injecting a lot of rubato into things where frankly, there shouldn't be rubato. It's kind of a classical thing to do, right? What you want to do is clear up rhythm as clearly as possible so people can sort of parse it a little better. Like this passage here, I probably would have notated like this. Why are you not? You know, these are the rhythms. This is how I would have done it, right? Because you want to show where the beats are. And this is going to confuse people because it doesn't show where the beat is. This is where the beat is, right? But the bars, the beams are sort of tied across the beat. So that's somebody's going to get confused. The harp part's going to go wrong. You know, same with this, right? Like there's some notational things that could probably just sort of help out a little bit. Now, real harps would not be able to switch to an A natural while they're holding the A flat. You know, here's an A flat, right? the way real harps work is that you have to take all of your A's and make them all sharp, natural, or flat, right? So you can't just quickly have an A natural in there. Just a little thing to watch out for with harp. Generally, I think most of my notes are, I guess, sort of like housekeeping notes in a way with this piece, you know? Just ways to sort of clean it up, just to make the live performance of it just a little better. Okay, here's another thing. What I really like about this passage here is, here's your cello solo, right? For those who don't read piano class, this is a G. It's above your accompaniment here, right? That's actually a really nice thing to do, to take your cello. And by the way, the cello in that register soars, right? It's gorgeous. Cello has probably the most usable range, I think, of all the stringed instruments. Actually, all the stringed instruments are really, really, really versatile in that regard. But cello, man, a high cello solo is just a gorgeous, gorgeous sound, right? So what you've done smartly here is that you have the cello actually above all the other instruments. I would probably indicate solo. The cellist knows, you know, really go for it, right? Play it with a lot of vibrato. You've already marked it espressivo, great. The thing I would suggest to you, though, is don't be afraid. If you have a cello in this register, it's a very strident sound. It's going to jump out over almost anything. I mean, you could even have that playing against a full orchestra, and you will hear that cello line, right? Because it's so strident. Don't be afraid to have your accompaniment be above your solo line, right? I think people tend to have a tendency to sort of think about melody as the province of the top voice of your piece. It doesn't necessarily have to be. In fact, there's a lot you can do above a melody that doesn't steal away attention from something that's happening kind of lower in the register or in the middle of the register, right? I would say, you know, don't be afraid of that sort of stuff. Like, stretch it out. And that's kind of one of my my things about this piece. It feels like you're not, for much of the piece, you're not utilizing the full spectrum of what the strings can do. A lot of it seems kind of tight and compact, right? Which isn't in itself a bad thing, but you do want to be able to spread out quite a bit, you know, and you don't have to anchor things down at the bottom of the range so much. You can have things be up high, you know, you can have a lot of room, and that'll create a lot of nice effect, I think. And this is a sort of a thing that I see with a lot of the pieces that were submitted. There is a tendency to have the range of your piece kind of be the same thing all throughout, you know. Sometimes it's all right here. Sometimes it's all the full spectrum all the way across, right? Sometimes it's all down here. I mean, there is this sort of tendency to sort of get locked into an idea. And one of the tools that we have at our disposal to add interest and to mix it up and to sustain your listeners is this idea of using different areas of the frequency spectrum, right? So in your next piece, I'd encourage you to do that. And I would encourage you to write a piece in whatever key you feel comfortable doing so, and then just hit transpose until you find the right key for the actual piece. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to slow down your creative process by hampering it with, for example, unfamiliarity playing in different keys, for example, right? I'm a big fan of removing all obstacles to your creative process. When I compose myself, the way I do it, I'll just demonstrate to you now. The way I do it, this is gonna get a little ugly, but I turn on a sequencer like Logic. Here, I'll just show you. Here's Logic. This is my creative process. It's not much to look at, believe me. I pull up a piano sound, I hit record, turn off the click, and then I just sit at the keyboard and I just kind of throw ideas around. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I turn the metronome off because if I'm listening to a metronome while playing, my brain is trying to play in time to the metronome, right? I just throw down ideas, and as I do them, I say, okay, well, this is utter crap, so let's make this yellow. And then let's say I play a good idea, like, right? And I'm like, oh, I should write a video game theme out of that or something. Like I say, okay, well, that's good. Let's make that red. And I just do this for hours on end, right? And at the end of it all I need is 10 good seconds out of hours of doing this, right? And that's how I start a piece. Like, I just throw ideas at the board. I mean, sometimes actually pieces sort of pop into my head as I'm walking around, or, you know, I used to have a dog, so I used to walk my dog for like half an hour or a couple times a day. And I would just sort of hum to myself. And then eventually something I hummed would actually sound good. And then I'd just sort of stick with it, right? But improvisation can be a big part of your creative process. You can just sort of throw ideas out there and eventually something will kind of sound good, right? So next piece, thank you very much, Samba, thank you. Next piece I want to talk about is Aliyah Ramatally's piece. Why don't you introduce your piece to us?
Okay, so my piece today is Mondo Nuevo, which translates into New World. I wrote this in 2019 for the Commonwealth International Composition Competition. And basically, I kind of wanted to represent the Caribbean Commonwealth nations. So I decided to base my piece on the New World and talk about, well, through music, talk about, you know, the discovery, the colonization, and the independence to like self-discovery of our nations as it is today. So I kind of tried to translate that through my music. And the instrumentation is kind of a bit different. I tried to include my national instrument, which is the steel pan. And for a little percussion, I added in djembe. So yeah, I hope you enjoy, and thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Okay, let's play it. I'm going to pull up the score here. All right. Okay. Let's do this. Let's play it. Actually, put it on the screen. Okay. 2 pages. Okay. I chose this actually because I thought it would be good to talk about non-orchestral instruments actually. So here we go. Okay, super. Bravo, 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 bravo. And that actually came across reasonably well for like a Sibelius audio export or, whatever it was, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of that's just not how it will actually sound. It's going to sound way better when played by real instruments, but, not bad. Okay, my thing with this piece is there are a lot of chapters in this piece, right? And that's kind of in your program notes. There are three major sections, right? There's discovery, colonization, and independence, right? And I like programmatic pieces like this where it basically encapsulates a story. It conveys a history. I mean, I love that sort of stuff. I mean, some of the movements in To Shiver the Sky are very much chapter-based like that, right? The thing that I think that would have helped this piece a little bit is if some of the chapters were actually a little clearer defined, because there's a tendency for things just to sort of like spill over from one chapter to the other in terms of musical ideas that bridge from one to the other without a clear sort of definition between them. And so the effect of telling a history is sort of lost a little bit on the audience. And I think just a few adjustments here and there for little extra sort of division between sections will help tell the story, but also help maintain listener interest, right? I mean, the main thing, like right off the bat, there is this this thing right here. You've got a bit of a stretto thing going on here, played by all your instruments. Okay, super. But I think at this point, in terms of legibility, making it easy on your players, you probably could have just made this, in 4 flats, right? In A flat or something like that. Later on, you change keys to 5 flats, which I was a little confused about because I never found a G flat anywhere. It was all G naturals. But I think in terms of playability, I think that would really help. In terms of things like this for your steel pans, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this. Steel pans, well, first of all, do you play steel pans?
Yes, I used to play in high school. It's kind of compulsory to learn because
it is. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, so when you play pans, how often do you actually play a note and then mute it? Like, how much is that part of the standard gesture? Like, if you played da 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 da, would you mute that last note, or would you just kind of let it ring out?
Let it ring out.
Yeah, typically you probably would, right? So I think in a case like this note here, you could have just written like, instead of this, you could have written, oops, ah, shoot, hold on. iPad issues, hold on. What's going on? Whoops, sorry. Yeah, okay. This could have just been that. It could have just been that. It could have even been that. I think putting this little dangling sort of tie will help. I mean, it tells the player, let it ring out, right? Because if you notate it the way you did, then a strict percussionist would probably mute that note, right, after it rang out, which is not exactly what you want to do, right? Okay, looking at this, I know that the djembe is not well represented with samples. So it's a little hard to really kind of appreciate, what's happening here. I tend to think of rhythmic instruments like a djembe, especially a djembe, which is loud and resonant-y. It's the sort of thing where it doesn't lend itself to just sort of appearing for a couple of bars and then disappearing. I tend to think of it as a very, you know, it tends to be something that sort of comes in and wants to stay and linger, right? That isn't to say, though, it can't be, you know, part of, you know, the gestural instruments. Like these are all gestural instruments playing gestures, right? This is a gesture, this is a gesture, this is a gesture, this is a gesture. Your djembe can also play a gesture. That's totally fine. But where I think I'm missing the djembe is actually as an instrument for accenting major events as well. And, you know, what I mentioned before, how like, I think that, you know, your piece could benefit with a little extra sort of like clarity in terms of sections. You know, there's some things that you could do to help make a listener feel like they've finished listening to a section before moving on to the next section. So for example, here, this is all great. This high C, technically possible on a flute, but there will be a lot of flutists who will complain that this is too high. So just be aware of that. Also, it's kind of ambiguous, you know, what are the notes here, you know, between this C and this C, like between here and here. Is it a C major scale? Is it, you know, two sharps? Like, what is it, right? I mean, is it, it's not a, you know, it's not a, is it up to the player? I mean, you know, those sorts of clarification things can save rehearsal time, I guess. What I wanted to bring across here, though, it's a great gesture, but it's a gesture that lends itself to support from your other instruments too. You know, like this is the perfect time for everyone to go boom together, right? The flute does the grace note or the run up into the downbeat. Everyone else can go bump, and you have this sort of neat sort of end to your intro section, especially the djembe. The djembe could have a slap, you know, with an accent. It could be fortissimo, something like that, right? It could be a lot of things. You know, later on in the piece, there is a great sort of ensemble cohesion that you have. Like everything sort of reinforces each other. It all works, it ties together. Sometimes isolated gestures like this one here, they feel just a little lonely and unsupported. And, you know, sometimes they just need a little extra, right? Something you can do here, this pizzicato is great. There isn't any reason why it couldn't be like, you know, a double stop pizzicato. You know, these are open strings. Like you picked a nice open string here, so it's going to be very resonant. But there isn't any reason why your violinist couldn't, like, you know, play the fifth above it as well, or even, I'm not sure if you want to do this or not, but play a triple stop pizzicato, like a strum, right? You know, they can do that sort of thing. It just gives maybe a little more fullness to that downbeat, right? Now, you know, what I think is, let's see. Okay, so this is great. The violin part, you all know what additive rhythms are? Additive rhythms are a gesture where every time it comes back, some new extra note gets added to it. So this is version 1. Next page here. This is number 2, 2 notes. Number 3, you know, you've added a third one. Number 4, there. Good little device, right? I think it works really well. Let's see. What do I think here? Okay. This main gesture of yours, this main melody, I'm going to say what I said to Jeffrey at the top of this and say that it can kind of overstay its welcome just a little bit. Like the more unique, the more rhythmic, the better your lead idea is, the quicker it gets old, right, and tired. And I think there was a lot of opportunity that, you know, you could have deviated from this just a little bit so that it didn't overstay its welcome just a little bit. That's just kind of the sense that I got. Sorry for saying that, but next page here. Okay, so these sorts of gestures on your woodwinds, these are great for some articulations. And in fact, in general, I feel like you're missing, Well, no, you've got articulations. I think this is the sort of thing, especially rhythmic figures like this, where it's really great just to indicate, especially for all those unfunky classical players out there, you know, how this should go. Choose da 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 da. You know, you don't want da 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 da, or maybe you do, but if it's really more about da 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 da, then it helps to have staccatos over these things, right? Articulations are really, really, really helpful. It would be nice to know if we're still at the same dynamic here. I mean, is this forte? I'm not quite sure. It's the sort of thing when you switch to a new section like this, it might be nice to have that accented with a good solid djembe hit too, you know? Those are the sorts of things that really help, you know, break up a piece and give, you know, sections to it, right? So I was looking at this and I saw that, you know, these kind of overlap a little, and it actually works well in this context because it's kind of a complex rhythmic thing that's going on. I like it, generally speaking. I mean, another thing you could have done is you actually could have taken this and moved it up an octave. That's entirely possible. And that way, you know, you've still got the interplay between the lines, but each of the parts is heard a little more distinctly. You know, that could have been a nice thing. It's really, you know, more of an issue. Well, okay, what's nice here is that this is in thirds. I love parallel motion in thirds. Love it, love it. This is where your lines cross. I'm not sure why they cross. Something to think about. There are no hard and fast rules, right? Things, you can do things, you know, voices can overlap, you know, totally encouraged. But to know that you're doing it intentionally is what I'm after, right? I think some of these rhythms, okay, as somebody who writes a lot of world music rhythms for non-world music players, rhythm can be very, very tricky for standard, like orchestral musicians, you know, classically trained musicians who can sight read just about anything, but you really want to help them out as much as you can. I mean, something like this, you probably want to notate like, oops, like that, right? That way you show that the pulse is there, right? Rather than using this quarter note, because that's going to confuse people just a bit. Let's see, next page here. Dynamics, are they the same dynamics? I don't know. Would be kind of nice to know, I think. I do like this section quite a bit. I like when you go actually into the pizzicato stuff. It sort of mixes it up. The section break to me happens here when we go back into the E flat figure, right? Double bar lines here would have helped, you know, a key change would have helped a little bit. This note here, if the idea is that you want to move into a new key momentarily to freshen the ears, I would make sure that nothing from your old key is still lingering in the new key, right? To help complete that sense of moving on to new territory. You know, is this meant to be this here, détaché? Or is it meant to be bowed? Because this is bowed. So what is this, right? Things like that, just to watch out for. Just, you know, good sort of like organization. Going on in the piece, there's another thing I wanted to actually point out. I think this is misplaced. This feels like it should be here. I feel like the key change really doesn't happen here. You know, this is still sort of the same as the previous section, right? And then this is that 5 flat section I was talking about. To me, you're To me, it sounds like you're an A flat. And since you've got this G flat here, I didn't quite understand because almost every time there's a G played, it's a G natural, right? There's G natural, G natural, G natural, G natural. So I think you might want to consider using 4 flats as opposed to 5 and making it, you know, A flat as opposed to D flat, right? And from what I understand, this is the independent section of your piece. So you know, you want to really sort of highlight the fact that we're going to a new movement here. Steel drums. I'm not a pan player well, I've never even touched the pans, but there were some moments where I thought, wow, well, you know, like what I think, you know, if you're going to use an instrument like pans, you should exploit the range of like idiomatic things that pans do. And in my, you know, non-Caribbean mindset, one of the things that I think pans do really well are tremolos, right? And I thought this could be this E natural here would be a perfect place for a tremolo. Maybe not, totally up to you, of course, but I was just sort of hoping for more of that sort of thing. And in my experience, or in my casual listening to pan playing, I think the pan tremolo could be a really useful device for you because it's something that can actually get very soft, right? You can trim really soft on pans, and that can be a device that helps you build tension and build you know, momentum to a big cadence or something like that. So, you know, if you're using non-orchestral instruments in the context of your arrangement, whether it's this piece or any other piece, try to find the things that make that instrument unique sounding. I mean, a lot of times it's about the way it's played. Like, you know, a lot of non-Western woodwinds, for example, a big part of the playing style is all about the little ornaments that you attach to the beginnings of the notes and things like that, right? You should exploit those, because if you just want your non-Western instruments just to play Western melodies, you're not really tapping into the, you know, the full range of what they can do, right? On the whole, though, this is another one of these pieces where I really like the main motifs, like the main core ideas, and it just comes down to like the organization of ideas that I think, you know, could use a little sort of tuning, I think, just fine tuning. And this piece also felt like it could be a lot longer to me, to be honest, you know? I mean, I don't know if this was, you were trying to keep under the 3-minute mark with this. If so, thank you. But, you know, I think it's a piece that has a lot more to offer in terms of the story that you're telling, because the story is an interesting one. And I would perhaps encourage you to expand it, but also consider things like modulations, right? Going to new territory and incorporating more ideas into it. So, you know, generally though, I think it's a great piece, and you know, thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're running out of time here, but I just wanted to play a few more pieces that were submitted. I won't go into too much detail about them, but there were a few things I wanted to point out. So let me put this away first of all. Because we're sort of short on time and we're already sort of over, I'm just going to play the next piece. I'll just talk about it. This is going to be a piece by Dominic Wright. It's called Love's Philosophy. Dominic, I'm not going to have you introduce it. I just want to keep things moving. So apologies. sorry.
with the ocean. The winds of heaven mix forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing in the world is single, all things by a law divine. In one spirit meet and mingle, why not I with thine? See the mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clasp one another. Oh, sister, thou would be forgiven if it disdained its love, and the sunlight clasped the earth, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What is all the sweet work worth, if thou kiss not me?
Bravo, bravo. Okay, so Dominic, let me see if I can find you in here. I'm not sure if I can. Anyway, I thought there was a lovely bit of arranging here, actually. Really gorgeous. I just had a few things. You gotta put in some bowings. The bowings, you know, that you just gotta like. I think there's some enharmonic things that you could kind of rewrite that would make it a little clearer for people. There was an old-fashioned style of vocal notation, which said that you didn't use beams between things like eighth notes, right? So, you're writing things out with flags. That's really not such a thing anymore, at least not within the LA session community. LA session singers will want to see where the beats are, So things like this, you can beam them. You certainly want to avoid beaming across major beats like here, right? I think that's something you want to avoid. Just beam these as you would regular eighth notes. Your beaming shouldn't try to, like reflect the lyrics in any way or anything like that. It's just clarity, right? That's all we're after in terms of music notation. Let's see, Percy Bysshe Shelley, great lyric poet. Works so well, right? Let's see, enharmonic things like this, it should probably be a B sharp instead of a C natural. I mean, it sort of conveys the neighboring tone thing a little better. Right here, I think you'll want to watch out for accents on vocal lines like this, especially a very lyrical piece like this. Like I would sing this like, nothing, or nothing in the world, nothing in the world. You would hit those world, with those accents, you hit the words a little too harsh, especially with a forte above it, probably not exactly what you want. Bows within bows. I generally like to keep my vocal scores clean by not putting slurs, sorry, I meant to say slurs within slurs, slurs over held out notes like this, melismas and stuff. I think you can just rely on this little, lyric extension here to sort of convey what notes are sung under the lyric. But I know Hal Leonard disagrees with me, so it's just a stylistic thing, right? What else? Balance, you might run into some balance things here, depending on who your baritone is. Generally speaking, the lower in the register, it's going to be a little harder for them to project, and your strings, bear in mind that like tremolo kicks up a lot of noise, right? Kicks up a lot of the string noise and stuff like that. So your baritone might get lost under here. Sotto voce, great effect, love it. Generally speaking, a gorgeous piece. But one of my notes for it is that I thought that it was very, it almost had the opposite, I had the opposite issue with this than I've had with Aliyah or Jeffrey's pieces, in that with Aliyah and Jeffrey, I felt like they had strong core ideas that came back too often. Here, I'm having trouble finding the core idea because the way it's structured is, this phrase here, and then repeated, basically. This idea here, and then repeated. So A, A, B, B. C, C, D, D, right? It's very much like A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D. I would have liked for A, A to come back at some point, or A, A, B, A, A, C, A, D, E, E, A, A, something. I was looking forward to something coming back and anchoring the piece from start to finish as one complete piece. And I didn't feel like I had that with this one. So that's just, just a note to think about. Like repetition is your friend. It's your ally when you're composing music. So it's something to consider in the future. But like I said, it's kind of a gorgeous arrangement. I mean, and the strings are just done really, really well. And the spacing, the spacing is great. Generally speaking, when you're writing for strings, you want to give them a lot of space. Like strings are very resonant and the overtones really sing out, right? And so you want to leave open space for them as much as you can. With the body of the strings, you can cover more range than any other instrument body out there. And you should fully utilize that range. And that's what you've done here. Like, I love how the piece starts off with just, this whisper of a high cluster of strings, right? That just sort of gradually telescopes out. I think it's fantastically gorgeous, and I'm glad you did that. So I think well done, well done. Just give us a little something to come back to, and then I think you've got a fantastic arrangement here. All right, so I know we're totally running over time, but I'm just gonna keep going. If anyone needs to leave, go right ahead. I know it's really late for some of you. I'm just gonna keep going. Herbert Thames. This is a piece called Full Fathom 5. And this is an interesting one. I'm gonna play it for you now. This is from Shakespeare, The Tempest. This is Ariel's big speech.
Full fathom by thy father lies, of his bones are cold. those are pearls that were his eyes. Suffer a sea change, to something recede and strange. All these reasons, all these reasons, ding dong bell. Hark, now I hear them. Now I hear them. Ding dong bell.
All right. Bravo, Herbert. A lot of really interesting stuff going on here. Really interesting. Okay, something I would, right off the bat, something I would ask is, I don't know that this is necessarily an SATB piece. I think maybe it's a TTBB piece, right? I mean, you know, it sounds like, actually, Herbert, you can unmute yourself and I'll just talk to you. Herbert,
Okay.
was this, is this you singing?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
You know, you can write music for, it doesn't have to be SATB. It could just,
Yeah.
you know, all men, like barbershop quartet even, you know, because the reason I think this is you're not really utilizing the full range of your women.
Right.
You know, and that's, I mean, I don't know what your creative process is necessarily. If you're just kind of like doing this into a sequencer, Jacob Collier style or something, you know, the sopranos are low throughout, right? And
Yeah.
you could expand them. You could make it all quite wide, or you could just say, you know, this is actually just you know, an a cappella men's piece, right?
Right.
That's all well and good too. Now, I think what I like is that the piece is called Full Fathom 5, and so we very sensibly start off in 5/4, right?
Yeah.
Where I sort of wonder, what I sort of question is, do we actually feel like the piece is actually in 5/4 when we're listening to it and not looking at the score? I don't necessarily think so. I hate to say it. You know,
Yeah.
it feels like you could have just barred all of this in straight 4/4, and you know, dispensed with time signature changes.
Right.
You sort of get that. You don't quite get that sense, you know, that you're taking advantage of 5/4, right?
Right.
And so you could, you know, look for ways to take advantage of it, right? Generally speaking, like I think your harmonies are super interesting, and I love the way you come about them. Like, I think a lot of harmonic movement, actually, the best harmonic movement is that is approached sort of chromatically or stepwise, right? When you take, like, for example, like notes of a familiar chord and everyone moves a half step away in some direction, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, a whole step, you know, or, you know, whatever. That to me is the most natural way of finding sort of alternative harmonies, if you will, you know, non-diatonic harmonies. That was one of the questions that somebody asked me, like, how do you sort of add interest to your harmonic language? One of the ways to do it is just to start thinking about voice leading, right? And you know, the best pieces, the pieces with the strongest voice leading tend to be the pieces written where the composer is thinking horizontally, right? Here's what the tenors are going to do, and here's what the altos are going to do, and here's what the sopranos are going to do. Like when you start thinking horizontally as opposed to like stacks of chords, that's where you can find harmonic interest just by taking a note and moving it up a half step or down a whole step or whatever, right? A lot of my pieces approach chord changes like that. They're just chord changes where the singers, all they need to do is move a half step or a whole step in another direction, all of them, and then suddenly you're in a kind of a chord that isn't related to the first chord at all, right? The reason we do this too is for singers. Singers need a way to anchor themselves pitch-wise because it's very hard for singers to find notes. You can't just pluck it out on your instrument, right? You have to be able to find it. And a lot of singers just don't have perfect pitch. And a lot of amateur singers in particular, just, a lot of amateur choirs, there's just not made up of musicians or singers, and they're just trying to find the notes at all, right? If you ever sung in a choir, there's somebody next to you who's just like, they have no idea what's going on. You just kind of have to give them something to help anchor them, right? So I think one of the challenges that you're going to run into when you present this piece to actually have it performed live is with your singers, having them find the notes. It's going to be a challenge, right? Now, I think you have a really good ear because you wrote this, but not everyone will have that good of an ear. There are some things you can probably do to help singers spellings, that sort of thing. I would encourage you to, can everyone turn off their mics? Hi, can you turn off the mic? Thank you. I would encourage people, I would encourage you to actually to go through and approach this as, a member of each section and say, okay, well, could this have been spelled enharmonically? And would that actually help the singer find out, figure out what to do, right? Yeah. Something I had a question of. This was surprising to me that you didn't go ding and close off on the NGs.
Le cose di Peppe.
Okay, let's mute. Yes, please. This is one of these things that, you find in choral music, ding dong, and it's whoever's audio is coming through, if you could stop. You find that there are a lot of choral pieces out there where you have this exact thing. A lot of Christmas music uses the words ding dong, and it's always a question. When do you close off on the NG? When do you close off the NG? And what's interesting to me is you were very specific about when to close off on the NG on ring. And that made a lot of sense to me because the NG conveys this, the ringing sound, right? I sort of thought you'd do the same thing on ding and dong. Thought it would be the perfect spot to do it. Let's see. Okay, I just wrote this because, this is one of these things where the dynamics say one thing, but the movement of the notes say another, right? Generally, when things get louder, they're often accompanied by a upwards motion in the notes. Here, the range is sort of contracted a little bit, right? So in my mind, the natural inclination is opposite to what you've sort of written dynamically.
Okay.
Something just, I'm just thinking in terms of like a natural gut reaction here.
Yeah.
Love the harmonies at the end. They're gorgeous. I love the attention to dynamics. This is a great effect here. It'll work super well. If your sections are seated like, alto, soprano, bass, tenor, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That'll be fantastic. If it's being sung like in an a cappella group or something, I mean, great. Like, if you sing in a, semicircle or something, you really get that effect. That sort of spatial awareness is, I think, really great. I don't have a ton of other notes, except that, I think that maybe there is, I know this is part of the program. You want sort of this gradual sort of swelling and receding sort of effect of the ocean, right?
Right.
It does have a tendency to feel all sort of like half notes, staggered. It all sort of has this like, I don't know, sort of a regularity to it, which is actually, if you think about it, very much what the ocean and the tides are like. But, you know, part of me was just like, I don't know, maybe just a little more eighth note movement or something like that here and there. Somewhere might have just given me a little extra splash of interest every once in a while, just to break up, you know, the sustainedness of it. It's all very sustained at the moment, which isn't a bad thing. But, you know, I'm just thinking, like, is there anything else that would just give me a little bit of extra interest to listen to? So on the whole, though, great piece. Thank you very much. I want to just talk about one more piece. I want to make sure we listen to one full orchestral piece. This is by Dave Dexter. It's called Tourist Route. I'm going to bring that up. Here we go. I was trying to shy away from talking about full orchestral pieces, actually, because they're a little bit unwieldy to talk about, especially on an eyeline sitting like this, because that score is going to look very small on your screen. This is a piece, though, that I think is a very good showpiece for you, Dave. And you feel free to unmute yourself if you're there somewhere, if you're still here.
Yeah, can people hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Hey.
Was this what the ask
hear me
or something like that?
Sorry, say again.
This is a live recording?
Yeah, this is a session I did a couple of years ago.
Okay, so I didn't have a ton to talk about, but I want to play it for people because I think what you do here is, this is sort of the ideal show reel showpiece. I don't know, like, when you send out samplers, do you use this piece?
Yeah, I didn't write it with the intention of it basically being a kind of showpiece thing, but it has become that. Like, when I describe it, it's basically a condensed score. It's like, it's all the stuff you'd have in a kind of classic adventure score, but in 3 minutes. Right. So it's got the fanfares, it's got the melodic movement and the quiet and the loud bits. But I was just writing it and having fun, but it's become like my signature piece in many ways.
And that is exactly what you want leading off your show reel in a way. You know, there were a lot of questions actually from film composers, and you know, it was important to me that we at least talk about one, you know, film piece, right? When you're pitching for projects, when you're showing off and trying to get the gig, what you essentially have to do is sort of set aside this idea that the music you write is going to be actually what's probably going to work best for a film. Because in most scenarios, when you're writing film music, you're actually under-composing in a way. You're holding back a little bit. There's a wide range of things you as a composer can do, but you're probably not going to do most of them because they steal attention away from the film, or they swallow up the dialogue or something like that. But the truth of the matter is, when you're trying to get the job, you take the other approach. You don't write something that's dramatically sensible and, you know, leaves room for dialogue, you know, and that sort of thing. You're actually just throwing everything at the page and showing off the full range of what you can do. Right? So I'm just going to play this piece now. I do it very well. I have very few notes. Here it is. Well done. Bravo, bravo. So, okay, well, I love the little bit of mode mixture here at the end, you know, the minor 4. I'm stuck with that. I really am. I think what's great about that is, you know, giving people just a little bit of interest, new interest at the very end there. You know, it leaves everyone with just a nice feeling wrapping up the end of the piece, you know, and it just kind of makes you want to re-listen to it in a way. And it's something that I do as often as I can. I always try to inject something very new at the very end of my pieces, even if it's like a rhythmic shift. Like, you know, one example is, you know, with Baba Yetu, which is a piece that some of you may have heard. At the, you know, the rhythm for that piece goes dun dun chuck duck 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 for the entire piece, right? But right at the very end, I changed the rhythm to dun dun dun, like this 3 + 3 + 2 thing, right? And that's the first time that really happens there in the percussion. I love putting just little adjustments like that right at the end of pieces. I think it does a lot for listenability, repeat listenability, which is what we're going after here. I just had a few minor notes. Let me see if I can zoom in here. Glockenspiel like this in intervals, it's gonna get a little discordant, like they ring out, the overtones are gonna start clashing. I generally keep my glockenspiel lines as single lines. You can hear it a little more in bar 55 when you do it. It just kind of starts to take on this crotale quality in a way. If it's a pedal glockenspiel, then your percussionist can kind of mitigate that a little bit, but a lot of them just aren't. Oboes in pairs, watch out for that because tuning can be kind of bad. I have some friends who swear by never doing atu and oboes. I think that's limiting. I think plenty of classical composers have used oboes atu over the decades and centuries just fine. But in a case like this, I might have just made it a single oboe. I thought that, whoa, geez, sorry, what happened? Here, I thought that there was a melodic idea happening in your upper winds here that gets traded off to the brass here. And it was a great melodic idea. I wondered why the diminuendo started right as the melodic idea was starting. And likewise, you know, you didn't hang on to that forte just a little longer here before diminuendoing. I'm sure you have your reasons, but just something I was wondering about. This oboe run here, I would have put it up an octave, honestly. You've already got this bottom octave covered by clarinet. You could even have both of these played as octave runs. That's another way of doing it. What else? This thing, dun dun, dun dun, dun dun, dun dun. I got a little tired of it. I hate to say it. I thought there was room for varying it up quite a bit. Like if you listen to like the Star Wars fanfare, right? John Williams does amazing stuff in terms of varying up his accompaniment. And that's, you know, it's like a marching band piece where it's like a lot of like heavy stabby accompaniment, right? And it's very rarely just like dun dun, dun dun. It's not so regular like that. You know, I think you've got so much other interest going on and, you know, you have no shortage of ideas. I think it would have helped to break up that dun dun, dun dun with more rhythmic figures other than this little triplet here. You know, I think there was room there. shoot. Let's see where what. Love the runs. Woodwind runs are great gestures, but they can overstay their welcome. I don't think you did. I think you're just fine with the amount of woodwind runs you did. But I will warn, it's very much a gesture that is associated with the genre, the generation of John Williams and James Horner and Alan Silvestri and Danny Elfman. You know, that generation of composers that were dominating the marketplace in like the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. We're more in a Hans Zimmer world these days. You don't see a lot of like woodwind runs and things like that. So it's one of these things where it might make your music automatically sound of a certain era of film scoring. You know, the John Williams, Bruce Broughton, Joel McNeely, you know, that generation of the Hollywood post-romantic greats, which I personally love. But just be aware of that. Range of your xylophone. I think that must be a notation issue here or a sample issue. That's not really playable. Treble clef, bass clef for the horns there. On the whole, though, I thought it was a really nice piece. And I think this is what will really catch people's attention, you know, when you send it out. And let me ask you, actually, Dave, where did you record this and who recorded it?
Can everyone hear me still?
Yeah.
Yeah. This was recorded with the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra in Smeky Studios,
Okay.
which has done quite a lot of session stuff that you've probably all heard. Kind of in a kind of mid kind of tier of session stuff, like the relatively cheaper kind of European session market, but still pretty good quality.
Yeah, actually, they've gotten a lot better. And actually, this is a really good recording. I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that in a way. How long did it take them to record this?
I have it noted down somewhere just out of interest and I've forgotten, but we were pretty much averaging about 4 minutes per hour. And the music was all of this kind of level of complexity and density. So it was about what I expected from previous sessions.
Wow.
In this piece, actually, the harp had to be re-recorded because the harpist did not get it on the day, which is probably partially some of my writing, but also the trumpets and possibly some of the horns, not all of them, but just some of the big fanfare lines were re-recorded and doubled, and then like some of the flop notes were edited out, because when it came to the really big fanfares, it wasn't quite there, but on the day it wasn't very obvious. But when I listened back to the stems, I had to kind of had to hire someone to re-record a couple of lines. Probably now I wouldn't notice so much, but you know, when you're recording something live for the first time, it's so in your head, and any difference is unconscionable. So I had to go in and fix it. But now I might not if it was happening today.
I don't know. I still look back on old recordings and say, oh my God, why didn't I fix that? Like, I mean, I don't think, you know, one should discount that impulse. I mean, this is something you're gonna have to live with for the rest of your life, right? So it's worth it to fix things. That's just how I think of things. I think it's worth really polishing and getting things right. But it's, I mean, for all you composers out there who are looking for demo reel approaches and ways to sort of like beef up your reel and get the gigs, like hiring something like the CPPO, it's not a bad way to go, you know? I mean, it's what, like 20 euros per musician per hour or something like that? It's pretty reasonable.
It's pretty reasonable. I think you have to do a minimum. But before I used them, I used an orchestra or a company called Dynamedian, and they work out as slightly more expensive, but you can do just a minute of music rather than having to do like 4 or 5 minutes. What I'd recommend actually for anyone wanting to get into live recording is start off even smaller, because the first things I did was string quartet, which obviously is very cheap relatively if you can find a good local quartet or remote quartet, and then you can work on all of the kind of live concepts. And then when you go to something bigger, it's less of a step up, and you've already had that live experience, because there's all that stuff that can happen in a live session that you don't know until it's happened. by which I mean mistakes, obviously, stuff you wouldn't think of. And any kind of live session, whether it's big or small, will prepare you for that, in my opinion.
Really true. And especially if you're doing something like the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, you have to get used to the workflow of working with a translator as well, right? Because you can't just
yeah
instructions in English, or you have to work if you're doing it remotely. Oh, that's the other thing that we should mention about an organization like City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. You can book them and just tune into the recording session, much as we're doing here. You don't even have to go out to Prague. There's no real advantage in a way of being out in Prague, because you can't speak to musicians directly anyway, unless you speak Czech. So you can kind of do it remotely like this. But, Dave, you're right in that doing a couple run-throughs as a producer in the booth before you book a huge session is probably a good idea. And there are a lot of remote recording services out there, like in Slovenia, for example, or Budapest, or there are several, I think, in the Czech Republic. You might be able to do it in Russia now, Portugal. I mean, there's just a lot of services out there. And many of them you can book by the hour, or even a half hour sometimes. It's just worth trying to get that experience of working with live players. One of my formative educational experiences was actually being hired to transcribe film scores that were then re-recorded by the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. And this is for a record company called Silver Screen Records. They do a lot of CD re-releases, like the best of James Bond and stuff like that, right? And my job was to transcribe old scores so that they could be replayed. And what you find is that you transcribe things and you make a mistake, and they play your part and it sounds terrible because you've obviously made a mistake. And you never ever want to make that mistake ever again in your life, right? And there's no better way to sort of, kick yourself in the butt than to be shamed by an orchestra for writing unplayable stuff. And it hurts, but it's something that I think everyone kind of goes through at some point or another, right? And the more you do it, the better you are at writing for live orchestra, and the more comfortable you feel standing in front of the orchestra and conducting yourself, right? Did you conduct this, or did one of their guys? Or
no, they had a kind of pool of conductors, and they hired a guy, I forget what he was called, who's more known as a kind of opera guy, but obviously has experience with big symphonic orchestras. Richard Hine, I think was his name.
Super.
So yeah, I can't conduct. I mean, I can't read music, so this would have been, there was that extra level of paranoia on the day as well, because if someone says that G on the violins, I'd have gone, what?
Well,
I had to be incredibly prepared for any possible question.
Well,
it was, yeah.
I mean, the end result is what matters, right? It's not imperative that one learn to read music if you're going into, film scoring and stuff like that. It doesn't hurt to learn music, to read, it's just another tool. But there are a lot of composers in town who don't, and that's totally fine. So, I mean, end result is I think you have a great demo reel piece, and it checks off all the boxes that I think you want to check off when you're putting something on your reel, right? It gets to new ideas, it showcases a range of styles, you never get tired of it. Nice little delightful moments to always sort of keep your ears fresh. It tells a story, it sounds familiar, yet it's new. I mean, these are things that you want to actually lean on when you put music out there in the world to try to get scoring gigs. And so I think, this is a good show reel piece like that. There are actually a number of pieces. There were full orchestral pieces that I could have said the exact same thing about. I just picked yours, but there were a lot of very, very fully realized, very sophisticated full orchestral pieces that were submitted. And unfortunately, they don't make for great virtual masterclass discussion because the scores are so big and there's so much to talk about. But I want to applaud everyone who submitted those. And actually I want to applaud all of you for submitting. It was quite an experience going through all of these. And you know, kind of fun in a way. I actually spent way more time looking at all these scores than I was planning on doing. And, you know, I enjoyed listening to your music. I think there's a lot of promise out there. There's a lot of skill. And I hope that with the diversity of sounds and approaches out there, that I hope you all continue to find your voice and don't get swayed one way or another by, you know, thinking that you have to write in a certain way, or thinking you have to write the same way as your composition professors, or, you know, thinking that you have to follow this trend or something. I think the most important thing is to be original and be true to yourself, because that's the only version of yourself that you'll be able to sustain over a decades-long composing career. You know, whoever you are, you should embrace that, own it, put it out there in the world, and someone will appreciate that, and someone will love the music you write. So I'm going to end on that note. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for staying an extra hour. That was completely unplanned, but I had a lot to say. Thank you for the composers who were brave enough to submit pieces and introduce them and talk about them. And maybe we'll do this again sometime. So keep an eye on my social media. You know, when things lighten up on my own composing load, let's do this again, okay? So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am going to post this video on YouTube after getting permission from all the people who had their works premiered tonight. And if anyone wants to share it or refer back to it later on, go ahead, be more than welcome to. Thank you again. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you all some other time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.